The sky was torn open with thunder. Rain poured like endless sheets of silver, drenching everything in its path. The river that usually flowed gently along the edge of the village had transformed into a raging monster, swollen with the fury of the storm. The trees bent low under the weight of the rain, and the crack of lightning painted the darkness with sudden flashes of blinding white. In the middle of this chaos, a boy named Arav was running. His breath came hard, each gulp of air heavy with the dampness of the storm. His feet splashed through muddy puddles as he rushed toward the sound of desperate cries. Arav was just 16, tall and lanky, with a face that carried the innocence of youth but eyes that had seen more hardship than most his age. The flood had struck their small town unexpectedly. The dam upstream had released water after days of relentless rainfall, and within hours, homes near the riverbank were submerged. Families were stranded on rooftops, belongings were swept away like toys, and the once familiar streets had become rivers of fear. Arav had been helping neighbors all day, guiding the elderly to higher ground, fetching blankets, and distributing drinking water where he could. But now, in the rising storm, his heart thudded harder, because the cries he heard were of a little girl, trapped somewhere in the raging floodwaters. Help! Someone help me! The faint voice broke through the roar of the river. Arav's eyes darted across the swollen waters, illuminated for a moment by a flash of lightning. That's when he saw her, clinging desperately to the branch of a tree that was half submerged in the torrent. She was no more than 6 or 7 years old, her tiny body trembling with cold and fear. The current slapped against her, threatening to tear her away. Without hesitation, Arav kicked off his sandals and plunged into the river. The cold water hit him like knives, stealing his breath. For a moment, the current dragged him under, tumbling him through the debris, branches, leaves, broken pieces of wood from destroyed houses. But Arav fought back, pushing upward with his arms until his head broke through the surface. His eyes locked on the girl. Hold on. Don't let go, I'm coming. He shouted, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him over the storm. The river resisted his every move, each stroke of his arms feeling like a battle against an invisible giant. But Arav had always been strong in water. His father had taught him to swim in calmer days, saying, "The river is both friend and foe. Respect it, and it will carry you. Fight it, and it will crush you." Those words echoed in his mind now, guiding him as he angled his body sideways, letting the current carry him closer instead of fighting against it. Finally, with one desperate surge, Arav reached the girl. Her lips were blue, her hands trembling so hard he feared she'd slip. He grabbed her arm. "I've got you," he said firmly, looking into her terrified eyes. "I won't let anything happen to you." The girl clung to him, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. She was shivering, light as a feather but heavy with fear. Arav adjusted his grip, holding her securely with one arm as he began the difficult journey back to shore. Every step was a battle. The river pushed, pulled, twisted. His muscles burned, his chest heaved, and water filled his ears with its deafening roar. At one point, a large piece of driftwood slammed against his side, nearly knocking the breath out of him, but Arav gritted his teeth and pushed forward. "Just a little longer," he whispered to the girl, though the words were as much for himself as for her. On the bank, a few villagers had gathered, shouting encouragements. "This way, Arav. You can do it." Their voices cut through the storm, a thread of hope in the madness. With one final effort, Arav staggered out of the water, the girl still safe in his arms. His legs wobbled, but he stayed upright. The villagers rushed forward, taking the girl from him, wrapping her in a blanket, checking her for injuries. The child's sobs turned to hiccups of relief as she buried her face into the warmth of a shawl. Arav collapsed onto the muddy ground, gasping, every muscle in his body trembling. Yet, as he watched the girl safe and alive, a faint smile tugged at his lips. That moment became etched in everyone's memory, the sight of a teenage boy defying the fury of nature to save a little girl. But Arav's story didn't end there. The flood raged on for days, cutting off the town from the outside world. Electricity failed, food supplies dwindled, and disease began to spread in the stagnant waters. Fear crept into people's hearts, but so did something else, kindness. Inspired by Arav's bravery, the villagers began helping one another more fiercely than before. Neighbors shared whatever food they had left, families took turns watching over the elderly, and young men formed rescue teams to search for stranded people. Arav, despite his exhaustion, became a leader among them. His courage lit a spark that spread through the entire community. One night, as they sat around a fire made from whatever dry wood they could find, the little girl Arav had saved approached him. She held a small, cracked toy doll in her hands, its painted face faded from the flood. "This is my favorite," she said softly, holding it out. "I want you to have it. Because you saved me." Arav felt his throat tighten. He knelt down, taking the doll gently. "Thank you," he whispered. "But you keep it. Every time you look at it, remember that you were braver than the storm." The girl smiled for the first time since the flood, and in that smile, Arav saw hope. Weeks passed. The waters finally receded, leaving behind wreckage and mud, but also resilience. The town rebuilt, slowly, with hands joined together. And whenever people spoke of the flood, they told the story of Arav, the boy with a brave heart who proved that kindness and courage can shine even in the darkest storm. But perhaps the most remarkable part of the story was not just Arav's act of rescue, but what followed after. For the girl he saved, named Mira, grew up never forgetting the boy who had carried her from death to life. She grew into a young woman with a heart full of compassion, dedicating herself to helping children who suffered in disasters. And every time she was asked why, she would say, "Because once, someone showed me that a single act of kindness can change everything." Arav himself never sought recognition. He remained humble, always saying, "I just did what anyone should do." But the villagers knew better. They knew that without him, the story of that storm would have been written in much darker ink. Years later, when Arav grew older, children of the town would often gather around him, begging for the tale. And he would tell them, not as a story of heroism, but as a lesson. Courage, he'd say, is not about being fearless. It's about being scared and still choosing to act. Kindness is not about having much, but about giving what you can when it matters the most. That's what makes a heart truly brave. And so, the legend of Arav lived on, not just in memory, but in the actions of those who followed his example. Because kindness, like a river, flows onward, sometimes quiet, sometimes fierce, but always shaping the land of human hearts it touches.